In this video, I'm going to cover some of the issues that might have been raised by my first video on this subject. So if you haven't seen that video yet, I suggest watching it before you watch this one. Now, one of the questions that might be raised is, since the Fedora installer did not even see the swap partition, how did I lose it? Well, one possibility would be if I didn't install a new partition from Fedora, I just assumed it would use the existing one, I would find that Fedora had no swap partition. But what actually happened was this. I hadn't removed any of the existing Linux partitions, so after I clicked on I will configure partitioning and then clicked on done, I got this list of all 6 existing Linux partitions. So I selected one and clicked on that. And then I got not only the root partition shown at the bottom there, but also the swap partition appeared, the existing swap partition that was connected with that Linux partition. In fact, it was connected with all of the existing Ubuntu partitions. So first I reformatted the root partition so Fedora would install there, and I gave it the entire capacity of 154.3 gigabytes. Now remember, none of this reformatting is actually done yet, but this is just setting it up. So when I clicked on swap, the root partition moved to the top there. And now I was faced with the question about what to do with the swap partition. If I didn't reformat it, Fedora wouldn't recognize it. But if I did reformat it, Fedora would use it to the exclusion of the other Linux distributions. I didn't know this at the time, but that was the case. So I clicked on reformat and proceeded. And that is how the existing Linux distribution I had on that drive was robbed of its swap partition. Since this is just a demonstration, I'm not going to go through with this now. I'm going to right-click on Install to Hard Drive on the top there, and then click on Quit. Now, the next question that might arise is, why didn't I just use automatic partitioning? So I'm going to show you what happens with automatic partitioning. First, I'm going to select the disk again, as I did before. Then I'm going to go down to Full Disk Summary and Bootloader. Click on that, and then click on Set as Boot Device. So I'm sure the bootloader will be on my external drive. If you were doing this on your internal drive and there were no external drive, you wouldn't really have to worry about this stuff at all. But to double check, you could also do this with your internal drive. Then I clicked on Close. Now here I left checked Automatically Configure Partitioning. And then I clicked on Done. And then I clicked on Begin Installation, and the installation proceeded as normal. I loaded that new version of Fedora on my external drive, and I used gparted to look at the entire drive. And what I found is that Fedora had installed a boot partition on SDB8 with 500 megabytes, and an LVM partitioning with logical volume management on SDB9 with 153.8 gigabytes. The problem with the LVM partition is that it's completely opaque from the outside. You can't tell what's in it. As a matter of fact, in that partition there is an internal swap area, but you can't see it here. And when I right-clicked on the original swap partition, SDB1, I found the menu included swap on, which is the option to turn a swap on, meaning the swap was off. So this was evidence that Fedora was not using that swap. And then when I ran the system monitor and looked at system resources, I could see under swap in the middle there that I was using 0 bytes of 3.7 gigabytes, meaning there was 3.7 gigabytes available for Fedora. So both the existing distributions and Fedora both had swap partitions, although they were different. Now, one of the problems with the LVM partition is that you can't see what's in it from another distribution. Normally I could click on another distribution and see all the files that were installed, but if you notice here, the LVM partition does not even appear on this list. And the only partition that I can look into is the boot partition, which doesn't have any of my data files installed on it. So if I wanted to rescue my data files from a system crash, I couldn't do it from the outside with an LVM partition. That's one reason I don't like the LVM partition. When I looked at the external drive with GNOME disks, you notice it shows the swap partition, shows partition 2, partition 3, shows a little free space, which is just an artifact of the partitioning. It shows partition 4, which is the extended partition, as unknown with 0 kilobytes. And then it shows 662 gigabytes of free space. This is not what's there. The LVM partition has screwed up the ability to see into this disk from the outside using GNOME disk and also using the file manager. Here I'm using gparted to remove the LVM partition and the boot partition that I just installed. So I'm clicking on SDB9 and then clicking on partition and delete. Then I'm clicking on partition SDB8 and clicking on partition and delete. Then I'm going to click on apply. Are you sure? Yes, apply. So that's done. I just have one big unallocated space. I'm going to close gparted. So now I'm going to show what I call SemiAuto Partitioning. I'm going to select the installation destination, click on my external drive, click on Full Disk Summary and Bootloader, set as boot device, and then close. Now I'm going to click on I will configure partitioning. And then done. Now I get a list of 5 existing Linux installations, and there's one missing because that's the available space, which is shown down at the lower left as 154.3 gigabytes. I'm going to go to the drop-down menu, and instead of using LVM, I'm going to select Standard Partition. Click on the blue line that says click here to create them automatically. Now this shows what Fedora is going to propose. It's going to propose a boot partition of 500 megabytes on SDC8, a swap partition of 3.75 gigabytes on SDC9, a root partition of 50 gigabytes on SDC10, and that's where the system is going to be installed, and a home partition of 100.05 gigabytes on SDC11. Now, a lot of people like these elaborate partitioning schemes, and they may be all right for a normal installation, but really all that's necessary is a swap partition and a root partition. When you consider that I have 6 systems installed on this disk, if I use this partitioning scheme for all 6 of them, I'd have 27 partitions on this disk. Far too much. But I'm going to click on Done. Now I get a summary of what was just shown, and I'm going to accept the changes, even though this is not what I would normally prefer. Then I'm going to begin installation. Now, when I load that version of Fedora and look at the disk using gparted, I see an awful lot of partitions, of course. This boot partition on what is now SDB8, the swap partition on SDB9. This isn't labeled here, but this is the root partition on SDB10. This is the home partition on SDB11. Of course, SDB7 is existing, and that's out of order because I removed one of the interior partitions. The advantage of this over the LVM system is that I can see into this file system from the outside, and if I want, I can copy files out of this. I could copy all of these files out of here and copy them onto another disk, so that if this system crashed, for instance, I could rescue all of my data from another installation. This is something I couldn't do with LVM. Looking at this from GNOME disks, it shows all of the partitions, the swap partition on SDB1, file system on SDB2, file system on SDB3, a little free space, extended partition on SDB4, 662 gigabytes, and what's inside of it is entirely transparent. Partition number 5, 6, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 7. So if I had to choose between this one and LVM, I would choose this one. But since this would end up with an awful lot of partitions on my 6 Linux installation, I prefer to use the custom partitioning I used in the first video. This is XRAM Tech. Thanks for watching.